Let's bring in News Nation senior national correspondent Brian Enton and former FBI special agent and News Nation national security contributor Tracy Walder. Brian.
Yeah, and in that clip, it kind of all makes sense now, the context of it, now that we have more information about the notes. And I was thinking back today, Elizabeth, I remember when you interviewed the KOLD news director,
right,
where the notes went, and she made clear that the second note was not a ransom note, but she wouldn't give more details about why she was saying that. But it's kind of interesting. Well, if it wasn't a ransom note, then what was it? Well, now, according to my source, we've got a little more information that in the note, the person who wrote the note said that Nancy had died. Said that she, I want to make sure I get the quote right, was buried with nature now, and indicated that the death was not intentional, but did not specifically apologize. And there's been some other reporting out there today saying that there was an apology, but I am told very specifically that there was no direct apology in the note, Elizabeth.
So the way that they deem it credible is actually rather primitive, quite frankly, is that they are all taken seriously and deemed credible until they are proved not credible. And so what that tells me is that these two notes that were received really at the very beginning of all of this are two notes that they have not been able to discredit. Also, it was pretty clear to me, and I said early on, that the FBI was taking them so credible that they were essentially helping them write scripts.
Somewhere in a drawer, a closet, buried in dirt, or hidden in plain sight, there's a phone. On it, a face, a name, maybe the last few seconds of a woman's life. Captured by someone who was standing close enough to watch it happen. And the person who knows exactly where that phone is has been silent for 5 months. Not silent in the way a frightened witness goes quiet. Silent the way a predator goes quiet. Calculating, patient, watching the chaos he helped create play out on the news, deciding when or if he'll ever let the world see what's on that screen. This is a story of a mother who vanished into thin air on a quiet morning, and a stranger who emerged from the shadows days later, claiming he could end the nightmare for a price. A single Bitcoin. One transaction standing between a family's worst fear and the truth. He has emailed the same newsroom more than a dozen times. He has watched the cameras roll, the search parties form, the case go from missing to homicide, and through every single development, he has stayed exactly one step out of reach. What kind of person does that? What kind of person sits on the answer to a kidnapping like it's a winning lottery ticket, waiting for the jackpot to grow before he cashes it in? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how investigators read a mind like this, and why what he isn't saying might be more terrifying than what he is. Before we go further, this case involves details some viewers may find deeply disturbing. Please take care of yourself while watching. If you're new here, welcome to Unsolved Files. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we cover the cases mainstream media won't dig into. And drop a comment below letting us know what city, state, or country you're watching from tonight. We love seeing how far this community reaches. By the morning of February 1st, what started as a missing persons report was already moving faster than most cases ever do. Sheriff Chris Nano stood before reporters within days and said it plainly. He believed Nancy Guthrie had been abducted, not wandered off, not a medical episode, not a misunderstanding. Abducted. That word changed everything about how this case would be handled from that point forward. Within hours of that statement, the response stopped being local. The Pima County Sheriff Department, already working the case alongside detectives and deputies pulled from other divisions, was joined by the FBI. Then came Customs and Border Protection, given Tucson's proximity to the Mexican border. Search and rescue teams moved into the Catalina foothills with dogs, drones, and infrared equipment. Within a matter of days, a single missing persons case had become a coordinated multi-agency operation, the kind usually reserved for cases law enforcement considers both serious and solvable if they move fast enough. On February 10th, the investigation produced its first real piece of public evidence. The FBI released doorbell camera footage and still images showing a masked individual at Nancy's front door in the hours before she vanished. It was the only visual record anyone had of a possible suspect, and it didn't take long to reach a national audience. That same day, FBI Director Kash Patel personally released a surveillance photo of a potential subject connected to the case, a decision that signaled just how high up the chain of command this investigation had already climbed. A missing woman in a quiet Arizona neighborhood now had the director of the FBI speaking on her behalf. The family responded almost immediately. Savannah Cameron and Annie Guthrie released a video appeal, speaking directly to whoever was holding their mother. Their message was simple. They wanted her back, and they were prepared to pay. It wasn't a statement crafted for sympathy. It was a direct line of communication aimed at whoever might be listening, an attempt to open a channel before too much time passed. Behind that appeal sat a financial incentive meant to widen the search. The FBI announced an initial reward of $50,000 for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The family followed shortly after with their own offer, eventually raising the total reward to $1 million. Two separate institutions, one federal and one personal, were now asking the public for the same thing: information at any cost. And for Savannah Guthrie, this wasn't a story she was reporting from a studio desk. It was her own family. Within days of her mother's disappearance, she made a decision to step away from her role on Today, including coverage she had been set to anchor for the upcoming Winter Olympics. It was the first major sacrifice she would make in this case, but far from the last. A national broadcaster, recognized daily by millions of viewers, chose to disappear from her own platform so she could be present for a search with no guaranteed ending. By the second week of February, the case had every marker of urgency law enforcement takes seriously. A missing elderly woman with a medical dependency, a masked suspect on camera, federal involvement at the highest levels, and a family publicly begging for contact. What the case did not yet have, and still would not have for months, was a name. Every fast-moving investigation produces moments that look, for a few hours, like the breakthrough everyone has been waiting for. This case had several of them, and none of them held. The first came on February 10th, the same day the doorbell footage went public. A traffic stop in Rio Rico, roughly 60 miles south of Tucson and close to the Mexican border, ended with a person of interest detained for questioning. Investigators moved quickly. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI executed search warrants on a property and a vehicle connected to that person, treating the lead as significant enough to act on immediately. For a brief window, it seemed like the case might be closer to resolution than anyone expected. By February 11th, that lead had run its course. The searches concluded, and the individual was released without charges. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that investigators had determined the person was not involved in Nancy's disappearance. The proximity to the border, the timing, the urgency of the search, all of it had pointed towards something that ultimately wasn't there. 2 days later, on February 13th, attention shifted much closer to home. The Sheriff's Department launched an operation at a residence just 2 miles from Nancy's own house. Roads in the surrounding area were closed to the public for about 4 hours while deputies worked the scene. 2 people were removed from the residence during that operation. One was taken in for questioning. By the following day, that person had been released as well, with no charges filed and no public confirmation of any connection to the case. Around the same period, investigators also turned their attention to the property itself, conducting a search of the septic tank near Nancy's home. Equipment was used to probe the tank directly, with investigators repeatedly working a long stick through the opening and shining a flashlight inside. Whatever they were looking for, and whatever they may or may not have found, was never disclosed publicly. Taken together, these episodes say less about any single suspect and more about the scale of the search itself. A traffic stop 60 miles away, a residence 2 miles from the victim's home, a septic tank on her own property. Investigators were working every angle available to them, treating no possibility as too small to check and no location as too inconvenient to search. But months later, every one of these threads had led to the same place. Nowhere, no charges, no suspect named, no public explanation tying any of these people or locations to what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The intensity of the early search was real, so was its inability, at least so far, to produce an answer. While search teams worked the ground around Tucson, a different kind of evidence was arriving somewhere else entirely, in newsroom inboxes. On February 2nd, just 1 day after Nancy was reported missing, KLOD-TV, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, received a letter demanding payment in exchange for her release. It was the first confirmed contact from anyone claiming responsibility for what had happened, and it arrived not at a police station, but at a television station. Investigators reviewed the letter, took it seriously enough to share it immediately with the FBI, and began trying to determine whether it had actually come from someone holding Nancy or from someone simply exploiting a national headline. A second note followed soon after, this one sent to KGUN, another Tucson outlet. According to reporting at the time, the letter demanded $6 million and set a deadline, 5 p.m. on February 9th. It included a direct threat against Nancy's life if that deadline wasn't met. The dollar figure was never officially confirmed by authorities. An early social media post detailing it was later deleted, but the demand itself, specific, time-bound, and threatening, was enough to escalate the case's sense of urgency even further. The deadline came and went. No further harm was confirmed, but no resolution came with it either. Then there was a third communication, separate from the first two, and far more disturbing in what it claimed. This note was sent on February 6th, just 5 days after Nancy disappeared. But unlike the others, it didn't surface publicly until June 22nd, more than 4 months later. According to people familiar with the investigation, this note stated that Nancy had died shortly after she was taken. It described her death as unintentional, and it claimed her body had been left in a remote, natural setting, language that read less like a ransom demand and more like an admission. Law enforcement made a deliberate choice to keep this note out of public view for months. Investigators asked media outlets that had received it to hold off on reporting its contents, citing the need to protect the integrity of the investigation. That's a significant decision. It meant that for over 4 months, the public, the press, and even much of the audience following this case closely did not know that an early communication had already suggested Nancy was dead. The family carried that knowledge privately, long before the rest of the country caught up. What ties all of these notes together is where they were sent, not to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, not to the FBI's tip line, to media outlets repeatedly, and specifically to stations with large local and national reach. That pattern isn't incidental. Whoever wrote these notes understood something about leverage. A demand sent privately to law enforcement carries weight only within the system that receives it. A demand sent to a television station creates public pressure instantly, pressure on investigators to respond quickly, pressure on a family watching the story unfold in real time, and pressure that can be measured in how fast and how far the story spreads. Routing a threat through the press doesn't just deliver a message. It turns an entire television audience into unwitting leverage. That strategy would resurface again later in this case, in a different form, from a different sender entirely. But its first appearance came here, in the earliest days of the investigation, when whoever was responsible for Nancy's disappearance chose newsroom phone lines over a police hotline and got exactly the kind of attention that choice was designed to produce. Before we go further into what these notes meant for the investigation and how each one shaped the month that followed, it's worth sticking around for what comes next. We break down exactly how investigators read communications like these, what details convince them something is credible, and what details expose a fraud. If that kind of analysis is what keeps you watching true crime content, this channel is built around exactly that. Subscribe now, because a deeper breakdown is coming, and it changes how you'll read everything that follows in this case. Not every development in this case came from whoever took Nancy Guthrie. Some of it came from people who simply saw an opportunity. As the story spread nationally, one man watched it unfold from California. Derek Colella, 42, followed the coverage closely enough to understand exactly what made this case different from countless other missing person reports. A wealthy, high-profile family, a media machine already primed to amplify any new development, and a household desperate enough for information that they had publicly stated they were willing to pay. Colella made his own move, sending ransom demands directly to members of the Guthrie family. He had no connection to Nancy's disappearance. He had no information about her location. What he had was a working knowledge of how to exploit a grieving family's hope and a belief that he could do it without consequence. He was wrong. Federal investigators traced the demands back to him, and Colella was charged criminally for making fraudulent ransom demands against the Guthrie family. It's worth pausing on this, because it's easy to fold every email, letter, and demand in this case into one single, unified mystery. Colella's case proves that isn't accurate. At least one person involved in this story had nothing to do with what actually happened to Nancy. He was a separate operator entirely, motivated by money, capitalizing on a tragedy that had already captured the country's attention. This is also, notably, the only piece of this entire case that has moved through the federal court system to any meaningful conclusion. Months into an investigation with no suspect named in Nancy's actual disappearance, the one person formally charged in connection with this story isn't a kidnapper. It's a man who never went anywhere near Tucson, who simply recognized a national tragedy as a financial opportunity and tried to take advantage of a family already living through the worst period of their lives. His case stands as a reminder of something every high-profile disappearance eventually reveals. Tragedy on this scale doesn't just draw sympathy. It draws predators of an entirely different kind. By now, this case had already produced 2 ransom notes sent to local television stations and a federal fraud case against a man who'd never set foot in Arizona. Then a third voice entered the story, and this one didn't go away. In the days immediately following Nancy's disappearance, someone began emailing TMZ, not a local news station this time, but a national celebrity outlet with one of the largest audiences in entertainment media. This wasn't Derek Colella, whose fraud scheme had already been traced back to California and shut down through federal charges. This was someone new, contacting a different outlet with a different approach, and a claim that would prove far harder to dismiss. His opening message was direct. He said he knew who had taken Nancy Guthrie. He said he knew where she was, and he wanted 1 Bitcoin in exchange for that information. It was on its surface, not unlike the demand that had already come through KOLD and KDUN in the case's earliest days, another anonymous figure asking for cryptocurrency in exchange for answers. But then he added something that set him apart immediately. Time is of the essence, he wrote, framing his message with urgency, as though there were a closing window for this information to matter. Then, just 1 day later, he wrote again, and this time the wording had changed in a way that was hard to ignore. Time is no longer the essence. Nothing else in his message explained that shift. No clarification, no walkback, just a complete reversal of the urgency he'd expressed a single day earlier. That phrase, on its own, became one of the most discussed details of the entire case. Urgency doesn't disappear because a deadline is met. It disappears when a reason for urgency no longer exists. For an email built entirely around the safe return of an 84-year-old woman, that shift in language carried an implication no one wanted to say out loud. The person receiving these messages was Harvey Levin, TMZ's founder, and the outlet's most senior editorial voice. Levin's organization fields an enormous volume of tips on every high-profile case it covers, the vast majority of them fabricated, exaggerated, or simply wrong. Distinguishing a credible source from someone chasing attention or a payday is something Levin has built decades of experience around. He didn't dismiss this sender outright. According to Levin, something about the earliest messages convinced him the person might actually know something, not necessarily that he was involved in taking Nancy, but that he had somehow come into contact with real information about what happened to her. That single judgment, made within the first days of contact, was enough to keep TMZ engaged with this person for months. What started as one email in early February would grow into a sustained, recurring correspondence, one that would eventually produce the most specific and unsettling claim in the entire case. For 5 months, the emailer's contact with TMZ followed a familiar pattern. A claim, a demand, a wait. Then, on June 26th, the pattern broke. What arrived that day was unlike anything he'd sent before. The email described a phone, hidden in what he called a secure location, one that he said guaranteed both the safety of the device and the integrity of whatever was stored on it. He wasn't offering to send files or forward evidence electronically. He was offering to disclose where that phone could be found, as though the physical object itself was a proof, not a digital copy of it. What he claimed it contained was specific. A short video, he said, showing the man he referred to as the main suspect together with Nancy on what he described as the day that was probably her last. Photographs of both people involved. Names, addresses, ages. It was by far the most detailed claim anyone connected to this case had made publicly, a level of specificity that moved well beyond the general statements he'd offered back in February. That single word, probably, is worth sitting with. He wasn't asserting certainty about the day Nancy died. He was relaying something he understood to be likely, language that suggests information passed to him secondhand rather than something he witnessed directly. It's a small detail, but it shapes how the rest of his claim should be read. The same email also addressed something that had nothing to do with evidence at all. Earlier reporting had suggested the FBI's analysis of his previous messages led investigators to believe the writer might be a woman. In this email, he pushed back on that directly, dismissing the characterization and making clear he didn't accept it. That reaction tells you something about who's behind these messages. A person solely focused on extracting payment has no reason to care how investigators profile their gender. It doesn't affect the Bitcoin demand. It doesn't change what he's offering. But he addressed it anyway, and did so pointedly enough that it became part of the email TMZ ultimately published. That's not the behavior of someone detached from how this case is being covered. It's the behavior of someone reading every article written about him and reacting personally when one of them gets him wrong. Not everyone found this email convincing. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed it directly in a radio interview on Tucson's KVOI, just hours after TMZ's report went public. He told the hosts plainly that the FBI had made arrests in connection with fake ransom notes before, and that he believed this was likely another one. Nanos wasn't dismissing the broader case or the seriousness of the investigation. He was speaking specifically to this claim, voicing the same skepticism any experienced investigator brings to an anonymous source who has, by that point, gone 5 months without producing a single piece of verifiable proof. That skepticism deserves to be taken seriously, not dismissed as a sheriff simply protecting his department's narrative. Nanos has overseen this entire investigation from its earliest days, and his public doubt carries the weight of someone who has read more fraudulent ransom communications, in this case, than the public has ever seen. What's left, then, is a contradiction the case still hasn't resolved. An email more detailed and more specific than anything that came before it, paired with direct, on-the-record doubt from the lead investigator overseeing the search. TMZ forwarded the message to the FBI, as it had with every prior communication. And as of this reporting, the phone this person claims to know about has never been located, and the proof everyone has asked for has never arrived. While the public was focused on ransom notes and anonymous emails, a different kind of work was happening quietly in evidence labs. This is where the case's real progress and its real frustrations were unfolding. Roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, investigators recovered a glove containing DNA. Its location and condition lined up closely enough with the suspect description from the doorbell footage that authorities treated it as a significant piece of physical evidence, something that could potentially place a real person at the scene, not just a masked figure on a grainy camera. That DNA was run through the FBI's national database, the system used to compare unknown genetic material against profiles already on file from prior arrests or convictions. It came back with no match. Whoever left that glove behind had no existing criminal record in the system being searched, or had simply never been DNA tested before. Either way, the most direct forensic lead in the case hit a wall almost immediately. In response, investigators reportedly turned to genetic genealogy, the same method used in recent years to identify suspects in decades-old cold cases by tracing DNA through family trees built from consumer ancestry databases. It's a slower process than a direct database match, often taking weeks or months to produce results, but has succeeded in cases where traditional DNA searches failed completely. Complicating all of this was a condition of the evidence itself. Investigators have described the biological material recovered from Nancy's home as a mixed sample, multiple people's DNA layered together at the scene. Untangling that kind of evidence, determining which genetic material belongs to a victim, which belongs to family members with legitimate access to the home, and which might belong to an intruder, is painstaking laboratory work. It's also exactly the kind of process that takes far longer than the public, watching a case unfold in real time, tends to expect. That gap between investigative reality and public expectation became a point of public criticism. Former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona was among those who publicly questioned how the investigation had been handled, alleging that the crime scene itself had been compromised in its earliest hours and that FBI laboratory resources had been turned down in favor of local processing. Those allegations were serious enough and public enough that a recall effort was reportedly launched against Sheriff Chris Nanos, an attempt to remove him from office over how the case had been managed. It's worth being precise about what these criticisms are and aren't. They're not a confirmed finding of investigative failure. They're public allegations made by credentialed but outside observers about decisions made inside an active and ongoing case. Sheriff Nanos and his department have continued the investigation regardless, and no formal accountability process tied to these specific claims has concluded. What's clear is this. The forensic side of this case has produced one tangible piece of physical evidence, a glove that, so far, has led nowhere conclusive. It has also produced public disagreement about whether that evidence, and the scene it came from, was handled the way it should have been. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and 5 months in, they are the closest thing to forensic progress this case has to show. A glove with no database match. A sheriff publicly doubting the latest claim. An anonymous source who has, by his own account, been sitting on the case's most direct piece of evidence for months. To understand whether any of this adds up to something real, it helps to hear from people trained specifically to evaluate sources like this one. Retired homicide detective Chris McDonough has spent decades working cases where tipsters and informants maintain contact over extended periods, and he's developed a framework for separating the credible from the fabricated. He's outlined 3 things investigators look for. The first is consistency. When someone claims knowledge of a case across multiple communications, the details that can be checked should stay the same over time. A Bitcoin address shouldn't change. An alias shouldn't shift. Core facts shouldn't contradict earlier statements. By this measure, the TMZ emailer holds up. His payment address has remained the same since February. His claim of 2 kidnappers hasn't wavered. Nothing in his 5 months of messages has directly contradicted anything he said at the start. The second is specificity that couldn't reasonably be guessed from public coverage. Anyone following a national news story can claim general knowledge that kidnappers were involved, that money was demanded. But specific operational details, the exact number of people involved, a particular route used to move a victim, the existence and format of video evidence, those require either genuine access to information or a fabrication sustained with unusual discipline. The emailer has offered exactly this kind of detail. A specific country, a specific number of suspects, a specific claim about stored video evidence. McDonough's framework treats that level of specificity as meaningful, not because it proves the claims are true, but because it raises the cost of dismissing them outright. The third factor is how someone behaves under pressure or when their claims go unanswered. People fabricating a story typically respond to disbelief in one of 2 ways. They stop contacting, or they escalate into claims so large they become impossible to take seriously. Someone with real knowledge tends to do something different. They get more specific over time, not less, because vague claims aren't producing the result they want. The emailer's pattern fits that second description closely. His February messages were broad, general knowledge of kidnappers, a vague reference to Mexico. By June, his claims had narrowed into something far more concrete. A hidden phone, a described video, named categories of evidence. The trajectory moved toward specificity, not away from it, which McDonough has identified as a meaningful behavioral signal. None of that proves the emailer is telling the truth. A sufficiently patient and disciplined fabricator could, in theory, maintain the same pattern. But it does explain why TMZ has continued engaging with him for 5 months, instead of dismissing his earliest message the way most fabricated tips are dismissed within days. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer offers a different angle on the case, one focused less on this single source and more on the investigation as a whole. Coffin-Daffer, a 28-year Bureau veteran who spent the bulk of her career working organized crime, counterterrorism, and gang task forces, has pushed back firmly against the idea that this case has gone cold. In her assessment, it's the opposite. DNA processing of the kind being conducted on the mixed samples recovered from Nancy's home routinely takes months, not weeks. Tracking a single vehicle through hours of doorbell traffic and security footage requires investigators to review that material second by second, a process that simply cannot be rushed regardless of public pressure. To Coffin-Daffer, the absence of a public update isn't evidence of inactivity. It's evidence of work still being done. She's also offered a specific read on the second ransom note, the one claiming Nancy had died and describing her death as unintentional. In Arizona, A kidnapping that results in death can expose those responsible to capital charges. Coffin Daffer has suggested that note may have functioned less as a genuine ransom demand and more as an early, self-protective gesture, an attempt by whoever wrote it to put distance between themselves and the most severe outcome the law allows, well before any arrest was ever made. Two experienced investigators, looking at different pieces of the same case, and arriving at conclusions that don't fully align. McDonough's framework treats the emailer's behavior as worth taking seriously, without declaring it proven. Coffin Daffer treats the broader silence from law enforcement as a sign of momentum rather than stagnation. Neither view contradicts the other directly. They simply highlight how much of this case still depends on interpretation, because 5 months in, interpretation is still the closest thing to certainty that anyone outside the investigation actually has. In a case this closely watched, even unrelated crimes in the same zip code draw scrutiny. One of those came in late May, when the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued an alert for a woman wanted in connection with a separate kidnapping and aggravated assault case. Cora Michelle Smith, 40, was named in a be on the lookout notice tied to an incident that occurred less than 7 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. According to the alert, Smith was wanted for an assault involving a deadly weapon. Court records showed she had a documented history that included prior kidnapping and robbery charges, along with multiple stints in custody. Given the proximity, it's easy to see why the timing raised questions. A violent offender, operating a short drive from where Nancy disappeared, became wanted just months into an active, high-profile investigation in the same area. Retired Detective Chris McDonough addressed this directly, noting that in any major missing person investigation, detectives are trained to cast a wide net. Anyone with a documented history of violence operating nearby becomes someone worth examining closely, simply as a matter of due diligence, before being ruled out. And that's exactly what happened here. Authorities have been clear and consistent on this point. No evidence has connected Cora Michelle Smith to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The two cases remain entirely separate. Smith's alert was issued for the incident she's accused of in May, not for anything related to events back in February. This kind of development doesn't move the central investigation forward, and it isn't meant to. What it does is show how thoroughly investigators examine every person concerned in the surrounding area, even when the outcome adds nothing new to the central mystery. Smith's case was checked, assessed, and set aside. Nancy Guthrie's case remains exactly where it was before the alert was ever issued. 24 days after her mother disappeared, Savannah Guthrie posted a video that marked a turning point in how the family spoke about this case publicly. In it, she acknowledged something the family hadn't said directly before, that her mother may already be gone. She described holding on to hope while still confronting that possibility, calling it blowing on the embers of hope, a phrase that captured both the family persistence and the reality they were beginning to accept. A few weeks later, in March, Savannah sat down with her longtime friend and former Today co-host, Hoda Kotb, for her first extended interview since her mother's disappearance. She was direct about where things stood. "Honestly, we don't know anything," she said. She told Kotb the family could not be at peace without answers, and she made a direct appeal to anyone who might have information, saying it's never too late to do the right thing. It wasn't a scripted media appearance. It was a daughter on camera asking a stranger somewhere watching to come forward. That same period, Savannah made a personal financial commitment separate from the reward already offered for her mother's safe return. She donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, saying she hoped the attention her own family's case had received might extend to other families still searching for missing loved ones without the same national spotlight. Behind the scenes, the toll of covering her own family's case while continuing to work became something the network itself had to plan around. Today, producers reportedly developed specific procedures for handling any breaking news related to the investigation during a live broadcast, including protocols to pull Savannah offset and brief her privately rather than have her learn of a major development on air in front of millions of viewers in real time. 5 months after Nancy disappeared, none of that uncertainty had resolved. The hidden phone, described in such specific detail in that June 26th email, had still not been located. No screen grab, no verification, no proof had ever been produced. The reward, now combining federal and family contributions into a total exceeding $1 million, remained unclaimed. Savannah Guthrie continued working, continued speaking publicly when developments emerged, and continued waiting, like investigators, like the public, like everyone connected to this case, for the one piece of evidence that could finally turn months of claims into an answer. There's one more dimension to this case worth acknowledging directly, because it's part of the story whether anyone covering it wants it to be or not. In the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, the Catalina Foothills neighborhood became something more than a crime scene. It became a destination. True crime streamers and YouTubers, drawn by the same national attention that brought in the FBI and the Today Show audience, began arriving in person, setting up cameras outside Nancy's home and Annie's, broadcasting live from a residential street where a family was still searching for answers. The volume of that activity became significant enough that Arizona State Representative Alma Hernandez addressed it publicly, criticizing what she described as people playing detective in a community already under enormous strain. Sheriff Nanos issued his own warnings to disruptive content creators in the area. At least 3 were reportedly arrested following complaints of trespassing and disruptive behavior near the property. It's worth being direct about why that matters here. This is a true crime case being covered by a true crime channel, and the line between documenting a story and exploiting one isn't always obvious from the outside. The difference comes down to method. Everything in this documentary has been built from named sources, on-the-record statements, and reporting from established outlets, not speculation gathered by standing outside a grieving family's home. That distinction doesn't make this coverage more important than anyone else's. It just means there's a difference between examining a case from a distance, using the same information available to any journalist working this story, and inserting yourself physically into a community still living through it. One of those approaches adds a public understanding. The other adds to the disruption of family is already enduring. This documentary is built on the first. 5 months after a masked figure tampered with a doorbell camera in the dark, the central question of this case remains exactly where it started. Who took Nancy Guthrie, and where is she now? What's changed is everything around that question. A federal fraud case closed. A glove with no match. A second note kept secret for months before finally becoming public. An anonymous source who claims to hold the answer and still hasn't proven it. None of it has produced a name, an arrest, or confirmed location. All of it has produced a case still very much in motion, regardless of how quiet the public updates have become. If you have any information related to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or reach out directly to the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. Every tip is reviewed, and as this case has shown, even small details can shift an investigation. This case isn't finished, and neither is our coverage of it. When the next development breaks, whether that's an arrest, a confirmed piece of evidence, or finally, the truth about that hidden phone, we'll be the ones breaking it down the same way we have here. Source factual and direct. Subscribe now so you don't find out about the resolution from somewhere else first. And before you go, here's the question we're sitting with. Given everything you've just heard, do you believe the emailer is telling the truth, or is he the most patient liar this case has produced? Tell us where you land in the comments below.